McGraw-Hill Audio presents 1,000 Barrels a Second, the coming oil break point and the challenges facing an energy-dependent world. Written by Peter Tertzakian, narrated by Dick Hill. Introduction. The Coming Oil Breakpoint. America is addicted to oil, President George W. Bush declared in his January 2006 State of the Union address. At the time, it seemed a stunning admission for an oil-friendly president to make. A year later, it's clear that what the president said was an understatement. The U.S. oil addiction is symbolized by the country's SUV-jammed freeways, far-flung suburbs, vulnerability to foreign sources of supply, and growing consumption year over year. But this is not just a U.S. story. On the global front, nearly every one of the 192 nations on this planet is also an oil addict, and newly industrializing countries in Asia and the Middle East are growing their habits as quickly as substance abusers can. All told, the world now consumes oil at the staggering rate of 1,000 barrels a second. As a milestone, this is a nice, even number. But think about it in immediate terms. By the time you finish listening to this paragraph, over 200,000 gallons of gasoline will have been burned. Next year, our rate of consumption will be greater. Our growing addiction to oil is not easily sustainable, if in fact it is sustainable at all. And this means that big changes in the world of energy are coming at you faster than you think. As you listen to this book, we are on the cusp of a tipping point, what I call a break point, that will change the way governments, corporations, and individuals exploit and consume primary energy resources, especially crude oil. Over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, increasingly volatile energy prices are going to affect how you live and what you drive, not to mention the economy, the environment, and the complex geopolitical chess match that is now being played out for the world's precious energy resources. The most tangible example of how this energy breakpoint will affect our lives occurred in 2005 in the aftermath of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, when Gulf Coast drilling platforms, refineries, and pipelines stopped feeding the United States. The sudden jump in costs, the desperate calls for action, and the anxious feeling of economic and even political insecurity were reminiscent of the oil shocks of the 1970s and early 1980s. Like any addict, we became extremely aware of the vulnerability of the supplies of energy that light our homes, turn our wheels, and power our cities and industries. The fragility in our energy lifeline that Katrina and Rita exposed highlights the increasingly untenable balance between the way we are supplied with oil and the way we consume its marvelous products. Day-to-day necessities like gasoline, heating oil, and jet fuel. Future potential calamities, natural or political, will continue to exacerbate the pressure points of an intertwined global problem. America is addicted to oil was only the first half of President Bush's statement. He went on to say that our oil is often supplied from unstable parts of the world. This caveat, along with increasing concerns about global warming, shows how complicated resolving our addiction has become. The challenges that can potentially aggravate our oil vulnerabilities are many. At different moments, we will blame geopolitical flashpoints, natural disasters, unsustainable consumption, tightening supplies, or the slow boil of global warming. In fact, the surface causes are largely irrelevant, since they are all symptomatic of the overall oil breakpoint. Our primary focus should be on our response to this breakpoint. Serious structural and lifestyle changes will be necessary. Beginning now, and over the course of the next 5 to 10 years, we will be forced to come to grips with our oil addiction and rallied to a new balance in our energy use. Making a convincing case for that statement and for the timeliness of this book might have been a challenge 2 or 3 years ago. After all, few people in society, business, or government worried about long-term trends in the energy industry, as prices were low, global warming was a non-issue, and energy security wasn't perceived to be threatened. But events over the course of the past 24 months have revealed the warning signs of change. The ongoing chaos in Iraq and the 2006 war in Lebanon highlighted the fragile and fractious temperament of politics in the Middle East, a region that holds the largest bounty of oil on the planet. China and India's voracious, growing appetite for energy to feed their addiction now has those consumer giants competing with the United States for the increasingly difficult-to-find oil that remains. In fact, multipolar competition for oil, which was a major driver of geopolitical tensions in the 1920s, has returned in the past couple of years and is slowly gnawing away at the Western world's thinning sense of energy security. Our vulnerability to political turmoil is not limited to the Middle East. Nigeria, the world's 6th largest exporter of oil, is increasingly plagued by civil strife and armed rebellion, mainly targeting that country's offshore oil platforms. Russia, the 2nd largest producer of oil in the world after Saudi Arabia, continues its not-so-subtle campaign to nationalize its oil industry. Not lost on Russia, or on any other major producer that wants to make a mark on the world stage, is the important notion that political power and control of oil go hand in hand in an energy-addicted world. As if there weren't enough issues encumbering the world's oil arteries, 2 new themes have gained greater prominence recently: nuclear proliferation and climate change. Iran's determination to acquire atomic capabilities adds yet another layer of tension in the Middle East, a complication that promises to fester for a long time and to have dangerous implications for the world oil supply. On the environmental front, global warming and the demand for cleaner energy highlight our vulnerability to supply cost, another aspect of the overall pressure leading toward the breakpoint. Indeed, in many industrialized countries, calls by politicians and the public to do something about global warming have grown louder and louder. Burning fossil fuels, namely coal, oil, and natural gas, is conjectured to be a root cause of climate change. But what alternatives do we have? As this book will explain, nothing in the energy world comes for free, and no new sources of energy have the capability to fundamentally replace the massive industrial complex of fossil fuels. If we as a society are serious about mitigating climate change, we must reconcile ourselves to the fact that this will be either a costly endeavor or one that requires substantial changes in lifestyle. Price volatility is an indicator of the coming breakpoint, one that's easy to spot when costs are rising. People have a tendency to relax and think that all is well when prices fall, even though a downward drop reinforces the existence of volatility. In mid-2006, the price of crude oil reached new highs approaching $80 per barrel, hurting corporate profits and creating uncertainty about the future for many industries. By the end of that summer, gasoline prices started falling rapidly. Did that mean that our problems were over? Hardly. The high hurricane activity that had been anticipated for 2006 did not occur. The war in Lebanon ended, and backroom diplomacy was being given another chance to resolve the Iranian nuclear standoff. To the oil markets, which thrive on the specter of natural disaster and the threat of conflict, it seemed as though world peace and harmony had broken out. In addition, the U.S. economy began to slow down, and the frenzied rate of global economic expansion seemed to have finally peaked. For the first time in 4 years, the tension in the world's oil supply chains appeared to be loosening instead of tightening. As a result, gasoline prices fell back to the low $2 range. But this did not mean that our circumstances had improved fundamentally, or that the problem of our addiction had been resolved. Nor is the news about other primary energy commodities any better, as the prices of natural gas, coal, corn, and uranium have at least doubled since 2002. The reason for this wide, sweeping change is simple. Worldwide, the demand for energy is growing at a never-before-seen pace, just as supplies of inexpensive, light, sweet crude are finally tightening and getting more difficult to find. The impact is only beginning to be felt. As the pressure builds, we will soon wake up to the realization that the age of cheap, clean, easy-to-obtain energy is rapidly coming to an end. Regardless of how our temporary circumstances fluctuate, core challenges that include unbridled consumption growth, increasing supply vulnerability, rising supply costs, and a constrained set of alternatives are resolutely leading us to a breakpoint. Metaphorically, the pressure may have eased temporarily, but the pot is still boiling and is ready to repressurize on short notice, an event that will occur with great likelihood over the next decade. Because of the urgency of these issues and the breadth of their impact, I felt compelled to write a book that would explain the dynamics of this world-changing event. The chapters that follow represent my highly researched and balanced assessment of our energy situation. While I am not needlessly alarmist about the extent of the changes that will be visited on us, I am realistic about the uncertainty and volatility that we will experience in the years to come. Although the stakes have never been greater, the history of energy shows that a time of crisis is always followed by a defining breakpoint, after which government policies and social and technological forces begin to rebalance the structure of the world's vast energy complex. This dynamic is already underway. Breakpoints are crucial junctures marked by dramatic changes in the way energy is used. During the breakpoint, and the 10 to 20-year rebalancing phase that follows, nations struggle for answers. Consumers suffer and complain, the economy adapts, and science surges with innovation and discovery. In the era that emerges, lifestyles change, businesses are born, and fortunes are made. This book is about understanding solutions and seizing opportunities as the looming oil breakpoint approaches, even as it deciphers the myths and realities of today's headlines about the energy industry. As an earth scientist who once explored for oil, a history buff and entrepreneur who appreciates the changes that technological innovation have brought to our society, and a chief economist and investment strategist who tracks traditional and alternative energy issues, my job is to look into the future and provide advice to those making multi-million-dollar decisions. The questions that business leaders, politicians, and concerned citizens have for me are simple but profound. How high will the price of oil go? Why are these changes happening? Are we running out of resources? What will happen to the world's economies? Where are the solutions going to come from? How can we take full advantage of the opportunities? In providing answers, I examine many dynamic variables, including the economy, the weather, technological advances, environmental issues, social factors, policy strategies, and geopolitics. Most of these factors have long been taken for granted because energy has been available to us without undue pain or worry for the last 25 years. But even now, a new lexicon of issues has become fodder for popular debate. Is China's growing thirst for energy sustainable? Have we entered a new multipolar world in which energy is the primary source of global tension? Are biofuels like ethanol a panacea for growing U.S. gasoline consumption? Will nuclear power and coal save the day? Again, will you really be driving a fuel cell vehicle in the next decade? And will it even matter? Which government policies work and which do not? What sort of global landscape will emerge from the turmoil? How can individuals and businesses navigate the next volatile decade? Where will the real, as opposed to the wished-for, opportunities be found? The issues are confusing, even to the experts. With my team, I sift every day through a constant barrage of news releases, numbers, and charts to turn the chatter and white noise into substantive ideas, forecasts, and recommendations. This book is about today and the future. However, the more I look for long-term clarity, the more I am drawn to the past. As a society, we have come to expect that rapid technological change will always meet our needs and solve our problems. And while the energy industry is as high-tech as any in the world, it remains rooted in decisions made generations ago. Only by examining history is it possible to fully understand our current situation and find solutions for the future. In this way, I will take you through a journey of growing understanding about energy. As you read this book, it is my hope that you will gain insight into the way historical choices have created entrenched pathways and difficult-to-displace standards that severely limit the options available to us today, the geopolitical currents that have inspired a global scramble to stake out energy claims with an intensity that we have not seen since just after World War I, and the fundamental issues concerning our most valuable fuel, crude oil, that are launching us into a new era of volatility and a subsequent quest for balance. How environmental and political concerns color our choices, and why New Age technologies will not provide the magic bullet to solve our near-term difficulties. In the end, my message is a cautiously positive one. There are energy options available to us, many of which will be surprising and unexpected to most readers. Understanding these possibilities will inspire confidence and optimism in our ability to navigate the future. Will the fuel cell become the steam engine of tomorrow? What will the next Edison be discovering in his or her laboratory? Where will the General Electric or Standard Oil of tomorrow emerge? Will the struggle for oil between the United States and China define the next generation of geopolitics, the way the struggle between the United States and Britain defined the early 20th century? Someday, historians will mark the first 2 decades of this century as the dawn of a new energy era. Chapter 1. Lighting the Last Whale Lamp. We're not running out of oil. There is plenty of oil left in the ground to last us many decades, if not longer. We are, however, running short of cheap oil, especially the desirable grade of oil that flows easily and is devoid of sulfur, otherwise known as light sweet crude. Our reliance on that cheap oil runs deeper and is more entrenched than most of us are aware. And because its supply is getting tight at a time when global demand is accelerating, a great change is underway that will put pressure on our lifestyles and our world. This book is about those pressures and why they will be so difficult to resolve, but it's also about the light at the end of the tunnel. Understanding the history of how we arrived at this point will help us to know what's coming in the next couple of decades, and it is through such knowledge that each of us, as individuals, business leaders, and citizens, will make smarter decisions. It may even turn a few of us into the Edisons and Rockefellers of a new energy era. Every time we flick on a light switch, turn up the heat, or start up our car, a vast and complex energy supply chain kicks into gear. To fuel and power our lifestyles, the world in 2005 draws from these supply chains to consume 85 million barrels of oil, 240 billion cubic feet of natural gas, 14 million tons of coal, and 500,000 pounds of uranium every single day. Light sweet crude is only one part of that energy mix, but despite a lot of effort and wishful thinking to remove it from the equation, it remains the most crucial element. Our thirst for it is insatiable. Historically, light sweet crude has been found in large fields. It's cheap because it's relatively easy to extract, transport, and refine. But gushers like the famous Texas Spindletop, discovered in 1901, reportedly spewing oil at a rate of 75,000 barrels per day, are simply not turning up very often anymore. The odd one that does is usually offshore, in deep ocean waters, or in some politically charged region like the Middle East. Over the course of the last 145 years, and certainly in the last 30, geologists and geophysicists have mapped the planet extensively. We've used all sorts of high-tech remote sensing techniques, from satellite telemetry to high-resolution seismic signals, to do so. I took part in this search as a high-tech foot soldier for Chevron Corporation in the early 1980s. We'd set up camp in remote, uninhabited areas of Canada's north, fighting off mosquitoes and black flies so relentless that we'd still hear their buzzing in our ears long after we had laid down to sleep. Working long days, we'd survey the territory, bulldoze the trees and cut lines, and explode dynamite in carefully drilled holes to take acoustic soundings of the geological formations below the surface. That data was processed using supercomputers back at the home office, where other geologists, geophysicists, and engineers interpreted the subsurface maps to make million-dollar decisions about where to drill. Since the early 1990s, more and more of this imaging has been done using advanced 3D seismic technology, creating a virtual reality picture of what lies below the surface. Today, many historically prolific oil-producing areas like Texas, Oklahoma, and Western Canada have been imaged in substantial detail. Even the deep oceans have been mapped this way. Talk to any petroleum geologist or geophysicist today, and you will hear the same thing. Nearly all the really big elephant oil fields, the ones that contain billions of barrels of reserves, have been identified. So, what's left to find? Aside from a handful of oil-rich regions, today's oil fields are increasingly smaller in size. A new oil field containing a few 100 million barrels of reserves is big news. At the current rate of global consumption, such fields would be drained in days if we could turn on a spigot. Moreover, many of these new reserves are located in geographically and politically inhospitable regions, generally the last places on Earth to be mapped in great detail. If I thought my experiences 25 years ago in the wilds of northern Canada were tough, believe me, I would hate to be part of an oil exploration team now. Chances are I'd be stationed in deep offshore waters, a remote desert, or in some uninviting jungle filled with rebel soldiers toting machine guns. Another consideration is that not all oil is created equal. When newspapers and newscasts quote the price of oil, they are referring to the highly desirable light sweet grades like West Texas Intermediate or North Sea Brent, which are easily refined into gasoline. The infrastructure of pipelines and refineries around the world have historically been built with this grade of crude in mind. But today, when experts are talking about new oil fields or increasing production output levels, they are also referring to lesser quality, heavier and more tar-laden grades of oil. Given the technical difficulties and the risks involved in extracting such oil, the price has to be pretty high to make it worth exploring for, then bringing it out of the ground and building pipelines and facilities to move it to market. At $20 per barrel, the inflation-adjusted price that we became accustomed to over the last 30 years, there are few places left on the planet where the economic incentives justify independent oil companies to find and drill any new wells. And that's only the supply side of the story. With global demand for oil rising every year, global production declining in the absence of massive investment, and with over 1 billion new consumers in China awakening with their own powerful thirst, the world is going to need every extra barrel of oil the industry can find. Sometime in 2006, mankind's thirst for oil will have crossed the milestone rate of 86 million barrels per day, which translates into a staggering 1,000 barrels a second. Picture an Olympic-sized swimming pool full of oil. We would drain it in about 15 seconds. In one day, we empty close to 5,500 such swimming pools. Considering the steadily growing demand, the resulting logic is grim. Higher oil prices are needed to provide the incentive for exploration. Over time, most of the new oil fields are getting smaller, more costly to evaluate, and more risky to tap into. Therefore, prices need to go higher and higher to keep up the incentive to explore. Oil at $20 per barrel is history, at least until major changes reduce the uncertainty, pressure, and volatility that we are now only beginning to experience. Reasonable experts, including myself, believe that oil prices are going to become increasingly volatile over the next few years. Seasonal spikes of $100 per barrel or more could easily be the new reality that consumers may have to bear until changes are made. Nevertheless, the daily news about oil is arbitrary, contradictory, and confusing. We're told many different things, often based on misconceptions or half-truths. For instance, we've all heard that OPEC can produce more oil and bring down the price, or that drilling in Anwar, the Alaskan nature preserve, will alleviate U.S. dependency on Middle East oil. Other pundits claim that a new Manhattan Project can wean us off oil altogether, while many consumers have come to believe that hybrid cars and fuel cells are the answer, or that conserving electricity will have a direct impact on oil consumption. None of these magic bullets are practical now, or will make a difference any time soon. In fact, our problems aren't going to go away for a decade or more. North American addiction to cheap energy is too strong, and the technological standards of the last century too entrenched for any new or different approach to be easily or painlessly, let alone quickly, adopted. Moreover, because of its rapidly growing demand for imported oil, the United States is becoming increasingly exposed to global risk. Right now, the only thing anyone cares about is the rising price of energy. But soon we'll be worried about potential changes to our lifestyles, the trade-off between cheap energy and clean energy, the necessity of building new refineries and power plants in our own backyards, and even the impact on national security. Our birthright of abundant, reliable energy is coming to an end. Pressure, breakpoint, rebalance. Most of us are savvy to the idea that there are booms and busts in the business cycle. We've seen ups and downs in the overall economy and in narrow sectors like real estate, jobs, stocks, bonds, and even commodities like oil and gold. The idea that our fortunes rise and fall with an almost seasonal rhythm is ingrained in us from biblical times, and modern economists have put forth models to explain and track the regularity of this pattern. Some of those models are exceedingly complex and data-intense, others more simple. But what about the energy cycle? In fact, there are many small cycles within the overall energy market. For decades, as you may even be aware, every time the price of an energy commodity like coal, oil, or natural gas has gone up, broad market mechanisms have brought the price down again. In simple terms, as prices rise, producers rush more supply to the market, such as when OPEC announces an increase in its daily production of crude oil to meet demand. At the same time, During price hikes, people and industries have a tendency to pare back their consumption. In conjunction, these two...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?